That's twisted.
This is Mark McNease in New York City with my co-host,
Rick Rose in Shreveport, Louisiana.
And you're listening to The Twist. Welcome to The Twist, everybody. This is Mark. I'm in the New Jersey woods this time. I'm here quite often. And I got my co-host, Rick, in Shreveport. Rick, how are you?
Good morning. Yeah, I thought I'd wake up to snow on the ground, Mark, here. It's finally, really, really cold.
Well, it's raining here. Cats and dogs, which I like. We needed some rain. It got really cold. But anyways, this is going to be the first of what we hope will be Twist specials, which is where we have a super fabulous guest on. Normally it's me and Rick giving you a twist on the news and happenings in the world. But we also like interviewing. We go way back with the interviews, don't we, Rick?
Oh, I do. A couple other podcasts before this and all that good stuff. But before we go on, Mark, I want to make, because we're still do the daily red lines, but I want to make sure. Now, I got to know the truth. If you had won the Powerball last night, which got up to 900, whatever it was, would you have been on the call this morning, or would you have just blown your life off and started something anew?
I would not have blown it off, because Frank brought that up yesterday as if we're going to win. He said, would you quit your job? And I said, no, I give him 2 weeks notice, because that's the kind of guy I am. Unless you really hate your job or you have a horrible relationship with your superior. No, I give him notice, man. That's the thing to do. I can't wait, by the way, whether I win the Powerball or not. The glorious day in my life will be when I give notice.
That's one advantage to being over 50. We can start to think in those terms, can't we?
Yes. Now, we're going to get Segann March. She's our special guest today. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but let's head out with the red lines. And I'm not forgetting anything, Rick. Trust me.
Hit it, Mark.
You ready?
What's up in the world?
What's up in the world? Well, angry bird watchers. This is interesting. An interesting take on this whole Oregon standoff thing with people that the New York Times politely calls protesters. I have other words for them. But anyways, angry bird watchers are furious at the group of armed men occupying a federal reserve in Oregon, demanding special rights and free land. Now, that's my editorial. At least 231 children, this is creepy, who sang in a boys' choir, led for 30 years by the brother of former Pope Benedict, were abused over a period of almost 4 decades. This has been in the news. I don't know if you saw that. Longer tweets are coming to Twitter. This is quite exciting. Because, Rick, I know you're big on the Twitter.
Oh, big. Just learned it.
Very big on it. Twitter has been working on a feature to post tweets up to 10,000 characters, according to a Recode report. And they're looking to launch the feature before the end of this quarter. Now, that's a novella. I mean, this is quite something. The daughter of famous civil rights activist Archbishop Desmond Tutu, this is a really happy piece of news, married her longtime partner in a civil ceremony in the Netherlands.
Beautiful.
Yes, Tutu married Marceline Firth. She's a professor in pediatric infectious diseases at the Vrije, I think it is, University in Amsterdam. And she holds the Desmond Tutu Chair in Medicine at that university. Now that is serendipity. A growing number of women and men say they are bisexual. This is another big piece here.
I read this study. It's very fascinating.
Yes, hat tip to Terry Clark, according to the latest national survey by the Centers for Disease Control.
It's really interesting. I just got to add to that the numbers, if you really looked at the statistics, those identify as non-straight, so either bisexual to gay. In the male community, it's definitely over 10%. In the female community, it's about 25%. So those numbers are quite high.
Yes, and it's the bees' time. It's their time. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders hold commanding leads in New Hampshire. That's news. And Rick Rose of Shreveport, Louisiana, was named one of 16 HIV advocates to watch in 2016. Are you the same person?
I am, Mark. Things haven't changed, but I'm, to watch things scares me. It makes you very accountable, or makes you think people are like binocularing in on your house. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think it's exciting because you have been. I mean, we're both of an age where we lost so many people that we knew in the 80s. We were there. We were there in the eye of the storm and the worst of it. And, all these many years later, this is quite, I'm very proud of you. And that's also part of how we ended up with our guest. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly it. I'm very honored in that this list was put together by Mark King, the popular blogger who writes a lot for different websites. But the list itself was a global list. It appears on HIV Plus Mag, thebody.com, Mark's blog, which is his very powerful blog. If you have a chance to look him up, and these people really, Mark, the exciting part for me was I was able to connect with many of these 16 people over the last week. Things go viral. A lot of people were thanking me and congratulating me on Facebook and Twitter. And before you know it, I have friends in these other countries. People were honored in England, New Zealand. A gentleman I'm working with actually living outside of DC, but he was from Africa and has moved over because they kind of chased him out of the country. Very interesting story. And I've really connected with a woman from Tonga, really, really looking to reach out to her more and do some work. She's where transgender people are actually referred to. The code name, if you're transgender in the nation of Tonga, is AIDS. That's what they literally call you. Yeah. So she's been in a very discriminatory environment and is trying to make that change. Speaking of the stigma of having HIV and AIDS, so I work for Gannett, which is part of the Times. It's the Shreveport Times, which is part of the USA Today network, as you know, Mark, and very fortunate to work with a young writer who's new in our office and took on a story about HIV about 2 weeks before I was named this advocate. And so I want to welcome Segann March and find out how this story all came to. It was our cover story on Friday. Good morning, Segann.
Good morning, everyone. Segann here. So the idea of the story came a little bit before Christmas. I was talking to a few of my college friends. I recently just graduated from Indiana University. And I was calling a few of my college friends, and we were just talking as college kids do. And we were just talking about, HIV, STDs, and whatnot. And, a lot of them said they don't spread it. It wasn't a big deal. But knowing me, I was like, it is still a big deal. A lot of people are walking around undetected. So I was kind of working on a story, and then Rick brought an idea to my head, kind of like, apps through Tinder, Grindr, and stuff. It's a hookup culture, and he's absolutely correct, and he had told me that. So we kind of switched the story over to more so about, instead of focusing on all demographics of gay and bisexual men, we focused more on the rising number of teenagers and young adults between 13 and 24 who are getting the virus. So technically, we just kind of ran with the story, and it was fun to create because instead of reinforcing, the attacking gay and bisexual men and the agenda, we kind of switched and made other people think, this is another group that's also affecting other people, and they may not know that they are doing that. So that was the importance of the whole piece, was to kind of show people that it's not who you think at all the time. That's kind of where the piece came from a little bit, and it was fun to write. I'm big on not reinforcing stereotypes. That's kind of who I am as a person. So when I was writing it, I was like, wow, this is great data that I've found, from the CDC and from other websites. And I had to just write the story. Rick was stern on writing the story, and he was helpful along the way, and it just made it easy and smooth to kind of get that information out there to people.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, when we talked about the data, when we were in the green room, Segann, you probably didn't realize we had you in the green room before the show started, but you were surprised by some of the data that came out of this article, Mark.
Well, yeah, Louisiana, I didn't know, was ranked third in the nation for its HIV case diagnosis rate. And I was curious when I read that also just about the demographics, like in the South, and how it might
Mm-hmm.
differ there. By the way, I was going to mention when you were talking about it's not always who you expect. I keep seeing ads now for PrEP on buses here in New York City, and with straight couples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising. I would not expect that. I would not, I just wouldn't think of a heterosexual couple using PrEP with condoms.
Well, and that is interesting. It's a big part of Segann's story as well, is the introduction to PrEP. Those that may not know what we're talking about, it's basically,
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I refer to it as the equivalent of birth control, the new birth control,
That's
or the
what
new.
I said.
Yeah, and so you didn't know really either, Segann. Were you? How do you feel about the drug, and how do you think people here in Louisiana, for instance, our friends at the Philadelphia Center, which work in the AIDS and HIV community, I mean, what's your gut response to the use of PrEP?
Well, I was unaware of what PrEP was initially before writing the article. I knew that there was a lot of medications that people who were infected had to take, routinely. But I had no idea that PrEP existed. And I kind of agree with you, Rick. It's kind of like a birth control in a sense. You take it every day. It's supposed to help you not be able to contact the virus, but just like birth control. If you miss a day or if you miss a few days or you drink alcohol with it or something, then it has no effect. So it all comes down to responsibility. And it's a great drug, but the cost of it is very high. So the number of people that will be able to get it, especially under the age of 18, which I know it's not under the age of 18 yet, it's going to be really hard for people to be able to afford that. Not everyone has the best insurance, and it seems like it's working. And I've looked up a few more things about PrEP, and just to get a background of it, who can take it, what are the symptoms of it, and honestly, I feel like it could be a good thing for a lot of people. But then again, I think it reinforces, how do I say it? Not being fully aware of what's going on. Yeah, I'll take a pill, but I'm still going to be irresponsible in how I, protect myself. So that's also what needs to be pushed out there, is that you have to be responsible when taking these sorts of pills. You should still be using condoms and other, forms of, other forms of abstinence or whatnot, just to protect yourself and to know that you don't know who you're really hooking up with, because you're hooking up with thousands of people when you hook up with someone. One person could be, everything just expands.
Right.
So being responsible while taking that pill is key. And that's the same thing with birth control as well. If you're not responsible with it, you might have a baby 9 months later. So
I think that's you're right. Responsibility comes with it. Mark, you brought up an interesting point too, about the South. And I think, Segann, that definitely came into play here when you started to put the focus on the story. You guys need to check it out. It's on ShreveportTimes.com. You'll see the story there.
Mm-hmm.
But really talking about that marginalized community of 13 to 24-year-old kids, that must have really resonated with our community, which is predominantly a family-oriented community.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I haven't had anyone write to me about this yet, but I think since, most of our community is, predominantly families, letting them know that, there's more things out there than teen pregnancy that teens have to be, considering when they're hooking up or in their relationships or whatnot. And I think that was good to put that out there. When I was a teen, I was more cautious than probably other people, but at the same time, you just have to realize there's so many things out there, and you're young, and at-risk behaviors, make all these things worth having at that moment, but in the end, you're kind of struggling with it, So it's great in the beginning until you might catch something, and not just HIV. I know the South Louisiana cattle parish, Shreveport, has a lot of syphilis and chlamydia cases as well, which also, lead into HIV, makes you more susceptible to the disease and whatnot. So it starts with those little things, the chlamydia and the gonorrhea, syphilis. The chlamydia and syphilis, it leads to bigger things. So it comes down to responsibility at the end of the day, for all age groups, and particularly for the younger age groups, because I think they're invincible. And I can say that because I'm part of that age group. So it makes complete sense overall.
They also, I was going to add a couple things. As a culture, we just can't seem to get to the place where we accept that young people are going to have sex. So in America, there's this constant friction between accepting that and dealing with it and adultly and appropriately, and then these sort of abstinence, nonsensical, efforts by people to just sort of like pretend that young people aren't going to have sex until they get married. But the other thing is just all age groups. You mentioned that just a second ago, and it's also true with seniors. We do have, well, I'm not a senior quite yet, but seniors have sex, and older sexuality is a subject that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but they're going to have to get over it because old people have sex. And they also need to be aware because there's a spike. Studies have shown a spike in people of, in an older age group of STIs and STDs in this, because they don't think they're going to get anything either. It's like I'm 65 or I'm 70. What's going to happen to me? But, the same
Yep.
disease doesn't know how old you are.
Yeah, I think, and that was our editor, Allison Bath, really put that angle on it as Segann took on the piece in our different conversations, is that there's this invincibility, which Segann mentioned. And a lot of that relates, like you said, Mark, to this fear of talking about. Give you an example of a couple things that came out of the story so far that kind of relate to my mission this year in HIV work is sex education. I was at dinner last night with a professor and her student, and the student, of course, said, we were never, I come from a strong religious Baptist background, and we never talked about these things. It's quite amazing. And then to your point, Mark, about older sex, I got to tell you, spoiler alert a little bit, but I watched the second season, finished it last night of Transparent. I won't get
Yes.
in. Yes, exactly. Did you finish it off yet, Mark?
I
Or
haven't
not?
watched any of it. I just read about episode 2 where there's a bathtub scene.
There is, and that is involving Jeffrey Tambor and Judith Light. And then there's episode 10, the final episode, which involves a scene with Angelica Houston, who's on the show this year. Yes, yes. And Jeffrey Tambor. And, I would have never thought I would see the day in my lifetime to have a black president, a female president, which is just around the corner, might I point out, despite the polls in New Hampshire, Mark. But I never thought I'd see a sex scene on television between that kind of scenario. So anyway, the world has changed. In some ways, like you both, Barth, are implying, it's staying the same. They're just different issues 30 years into this disease. But people, Segann, are still dying. And I hope you realize the import of the article you wrote. And even though you may not be getting response, that's a good thing because you got nothing negative either, correct? No one's written you and said.
That's very true. That's very true. I'm actually really glad that no one came, closed-minded. A lot of people who were writing probably would consider me more closed-minded to the whole idea of sexuality and how, there's different sexualities and, it expands across all age groups. And it doesn't really matter who you are. You're still having sex at the end of the day. Everyone is still having sex. Doesn't matter anything about who they are as a person. So it's natural. It's for the human nature to, to be involved with that. And if anyone says it isn't, they're lying. So yeah, and I've taken a lot of courses on sexual diversity, sexual orientation, human sexuality in college because it fascinates me and all the stigmas that are associated with these kind of topics that we're discussing. And it's kind of easier to kind of talk about this open-mindedly because, so many people stigmatize, the GLBTQ community, but they're not looking at their children. They're not looking at their neighbors' kids or anyone who could be easily affected just as much. So this was the importance of the article.
Yes.
Yep.
I think that's fascinating. And I would encourage you that maybe that's something we take on next in some of your pieces, because that is still a stigma. It's easier to look at someone else's children versus looking at your own children, and therefore your children are neglected. And Mark is, interesting enough, Mark was born in Mississippi, so and has family there. And as you know, Mark, it really is, over 50% of all HIV and AIDS cases come from the South now. And I think that's because of these topics we're talking about.
Yes, yeah. And also, Segann, I was going to say, Indiana University, you said?
Yes, I graduated from Indiana University.
Yeah, I lived in Bloomington back in 1978.
Did you like it?
I did. I liked it even back then. I think John Mellencamp was called John Cougar at the time.
He was.
But I grew up in Elkhart and South Bend, which is northern Indiana. I also wanted to I wanted to throw two quick things out there. One is I just wanted to encourage you because it's been mentioned that you didn't get really any response. That doesn't mean people didn't read it, because I go through that all the time as an editor and publisher myself. It's like, is anybody reading this? And then something will be published or something happens, and I'm like, I know that they're reading it. So, trust me, people have read your article, and it's fabulous that you did it. And I also wanted to say, just on this, I don't know, this was connected to something Rick just said, but anyways, there is a higher percentage of people who say that they have seen a ghost than that they have met a transgender person.
Amazing.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's all belief. It's all belief. That just verifies it's all belief system. And Segann, tomorrow I'm having lunch with your friend Chip, who's the activist over at the Philadelphia Center, our local organization. So conversations are continuing there. And, part of my big advocacy that I invite you to be a part of, Segann, is as we're building our friendship and fight together, is the roundtables that we're going to be putting together here in the Northwest Louisiana area that are dealing with issues with African American women. And that's a whole nother subject. Mark knows a little bit about my belief in men. I'd rather put the power with women than men. And I'm being a little bold in saying that. But, you know, if men are on the down low and doing what they're doing here and they're not going to admit it because of all the mores, then women have to hold responsibility for their bodies, and they have to say enough's enough. And I'm gonna hold my female friends accountable to hold the men accountable, because we fucking wimpy men just can't do it always. So I look forward to the fight with you, Segann, and thank you for joining us today.
I do too. I
been delightful.
There'll be more topics to come, after this topic, and, kind of talk about how we can all change that and, protect our young people, old people, or African Americans, I don't know, and every other demographic, I guess I should say. Yes, I think this would be a great topic to expand on.
And I now have a subscription to the Shreveport Times, so I'm going to be looking for your byline.
Wonderful.
Segann is a great education reporter as well. She holds the education community accountable here and also recognizes their successes, Mark. So, yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. Thank you both.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Rick?
Yes, we'll end with a quote. Which
we got our end quote coming up here.
We do, and I want Segann to stay on the line for it and for all of those. This is a quote that has carried with me since 1988. It's been a quote from Vito Russo, who the Celluloid Closet, kind of similar to what we're talking about here. He wrote the book. Mark, you know it. Segann, have you heard of the Celluloid Closet?
I have not, but I'm going to have to go buy it.
Well, after this quote, I think you'll see why you need to. Yes, it kind of it's become a documentary too, so you can get it some years later. They made it in a documentary that it doesn't blow the cover, but it basically just explores how the LGBT community is portrayed in the media, specifically in visual arts. And it's really powerful. But this quote has moved from refrigerator door to refrigerator door through the 8 states I've lived in since the pandemic broke out. I have it cut out. It's withered up, but it always goes under a magnet. And it has driven my battle to what we're doing. And now today, Segann, I officially welcome you by sharing this with you. Mark, you will heavily relate because you're part of this group that Vito defines as well. And here is the quote. Remember that someday the AIDS crisis will be over. And when that day has come and gone, there will be people alive who will hear that once there was a terrible disease and that a brave group of people stood up and fought, and in some cases died, so others might live and be free. Vito Russo, 1988.
Beautiful quote, Rick. Thank you. And
thank you. Very beautiful quote.
Thank you, Segann, and thank you, everybody, for listening to a special edition of The Twist, America's only clothing optional podcast.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
That's Twisted.